In many ways, the Beach Boys are an unusual band. One thing that makes them stand out from other classic rock bands is the fact that they aren't really a classic rock band. In other words, there's no riffage, there's no crunch, there's no screaming lead guitars, there's no big hair, there's no spandex, there's nothing that you would normally associate with hard rock, heavy metal, or even classic rock. And yet at the same time, the Beach Boys are frequently mentioned as being America's band, and they're also frequently cited as being one of the first bands that ever injected genuine art into popular and rock music. So I want you to listen here to something that Jeff Beck had to say about the Beach Boys, and then we're going to listen to something that Noel Gallagher had to say, and finally we're going to wind up with a few choice comments from Paul McCartney. And in between all that, I'm going to ask for your opinion and give you my reflections and comments. But let's start off right here by listening to what Jeff Beck had to say about the Beach Boys.
And those are the songs that really grabbed hold of me in the 60s, especially Pet Sounds. It's just, it's hard to describe what that music did to me. And the melody being so strong and the musicality of it. That's great stuff, but right. It transcends way beyond surf into almost psychedelic pop songs. It gave me the vision to make wild sounds on the guitar, because if people could have a pop single that changed key, it was a long, drawn out. Whereas 2.5 minutes was the max in those days. This really opened up the whole ball game for me.
And I think if you listen closely to that clip, you can hear his emotional reaction to the music. He is deeply moved by the Beach Boys and the vocal arrangements and melodies, and that is the point at which most people begin to cite brilliance in relation to the Beach Boys. They're brilliant in the minds of many rock critics, almost solely to the fact that Brian Wilson was able to create vocal harmonies and instrumental melody that are at the creative level of classical music. Pet Sounds is the quintessential art rock record. And basically when people speak about the Beach Boys being a brilliant band, they're speaking about Brian Wilson and his composition, arrangement, and production skills, along with the great vocal harmonies provided by the rest of the members of the band. Now, if you don't like the Beach Boys, it's likely that you dislike their vocal harmonies as well. So there's a serious difference of opinion regarding the genius of the Beach Boys. Let's listen in to what Noel Gallagher from Oasis had to say about the Beach Boys right here.
What album do you think that you've bought the most in your life? For me, I've bought Pet Sounds probably 20 different times.
Why?
Pet Sounds?
Yeah.
Because I love the harmonies on it.
Don't you think they're the most overrated group of all time?
No, I love Brian Wilson's harmonies, and every time
the only reason they're anyway successful is because they're next to the Beatles in alphabetical order.
That's why?
And Paul McCartney likes them. That's it.
Okay.
Barbershop quartet music. Rubbish.
Now, Noel likes to kid around, and it's almost part of his image to make fun of other bands, particularly legendary bands like the Beatles or the Beach Boys. He is well known for his ironic comments and for always trying to puff up and act better than the greatest of the great. And I've read recently that his feelings toward the Beach Boys have changed over the years, and he admits a bit reluctantly that he has come to understand why people like them so much and why they're so revered. When he made his original comment about the Beach Boys, I have no doubt that he meant every word of it. Now here I would inject something kind of interesting, which it's hard to find a high-profile musician who has anything negative to say about the Beach Boys. It's very difficult to find a respected music critic that has anything negative to say about the Beach Boys. Usually when you're hearing negative comments about the Beach Boys, it comes from just regular listeners, people who just don't like their music. So I think that Noel Gallagher is trying to speak for that faction when he says, hey, they, never really did anything to me. And if they didn't have an association with Paul McCartney, people wouldn't have given them a second listen. At this point, it might be a good idea to listen to what Paul McCartney had to say about the Beach Boys. So let's do that right now. Here's Paul McCartney speaking about the Beach Boys and specifically about the influence that Pet Sounds had over him.
Are there any inspirations, like other bands that you would listen to for harmonies besides the Everly Brothers?
Beach Boys, I think, was big. I think he'd heard one of our albums and thought, I've got to do better, And that was Pet Sounds, which I loved. It was like still one of my big albums, It was so atmospheric and different.
Yes.
And yet it was the Beach Boys still,
Yeah.
And we heard Pet Sounds and thought, right, we've got to do something better than that.
Yeah.
So we did Sgt. Pepper.
So I guess that when Paul McCartney considers you a musical genius and makes that opinion known, it's going to get other people to think twice about your music, no matter what it is. So I can see that there is a point to be made that Paul McCartney's endorsement of the Beach Boys had a lot to do with the public coming to accept an album as strange and offbeat as Pet Sounds. I've also read that the PR people around the Beach Boys were very careful about crafting an image of Brian Wilson as a genius in order to sell the new kind of music to the public. In other words, when they went away from the Surfin' USA kind of music and went more into the experimental and, personal expression of Pet Sounds, the record company management and the rest of the people around the Beach Boys were worried that they needed to have a corresponding change of image to go along with that change in musical direction. And as everybody knows, this caused rifts within the band, particularly between Brian Wilson and Mike Love, rifts that never actually healed. So my question to you is, who do you agree with? Do you agree with Jeff Beck, that the Beach Boys are one of the greatest and most brilliant musical bands to have ever existed? Or do you agree with Noel Gallagher that they're sort of souped up barbershop quartet and they only gained recognition and popularity due to the enthusiastic, passionate response that Paul McCartney and the other Beatles had to their music, which helped sell it to the public? Or do you think it's a combination of both? Think that there was an infectious hookiness to their early music that set a pattern for escapism and fun, kind of some of the things that I was talking about in my recent video on Jerry Garcia and the Beatles, where Garcia said one of the big points of appeal for the Beatles was their aura of fun that they had. I think this was part of the Beach Boys appeal as well, and I think that at the time of Pet Sounds and when Brian Wilson started to become much more sophisticated of a composer, they lost that element, and in fact they went in the completely other direction to almost a morbid and nostalgic overall sound, which is totally present on the song Surf's Up. So this is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. If you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.